Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1152 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. Bruh, it's basically only One Piece where you could have what is essentially a reveal and end up more confused than you were before. Honestly, this chapter has nearly left me speechless. Just one of those chapters that adds a piece that makes you want to rethink everything. But we'll get to it when we get to it. The chapter begins in the underworld with Luffy's squad. They know that something sinister is going on up top, but now it's just a question of what they're going to do with Loki. Oh, and Skopper is also mortally injured. So the Giants tell Gerd to watch over Loki, and Chopper tells everyone that he's also going to stay behind in order to monitor Skopper. And almost immediately, we have something which has inspired discussion. Skopper calls for Luffy, and he says, be mindful of the way you use conquerors' haki. Those guys are by no means immortal. So on one hand, this is pretty straightforward and pretty much exactly what I said would be the case. I think most people were probably of a similar opinion, right? We saw Skopper injure the God's Knights, or at least separate their body parts in a way which they couldn't reform. And it was pretty intuitive and obvious and consistent that conquerors' haki is going to be the solution to this problem. Skopper has confirmed that. But yeah, some of the discourse around this line is, in my opinion, pretty wild. I try to stay out of some of the power scaling sphere agenda piece over analyzing of all the power feats and things of that nature, just because, look, I don't vibe with the conversation a whole lot. But I saw a post from Morge, so I just feel the need to chime in. Skopper told Luffy to be mindful of the way you use conquerors' haki because these guys are by no means immortal. And I think that a lot of people are taking this, that advanced conquerors' haki is how you injure the God's Knights and also therefore the Gorosei, which is true. But people are specifically thinking of advanced conquerors' haki that Luffy learned in his fight versus Kaido in Wano. Which means back in Egghead, when Luffy was fighting the Gorosei, he was not using advanced conquerors when fighting the Gorosei because he couldn't injure them. I guess people were thinking that it was just that simple. Do the same thing that you did versus Kaido versus the Gorosei and boom, you can hurt them. But I read this totally different. And honestly, I have a theory that I think that you should stick around for. Personally, I think that this implies that there are different kinds of advanced conquerors' haki. I mean, that just seems like the intuitive thought to me. Luffy still has something to learn, a unique application of conquerors' haki, a new technique. I mean, I'll gladly eat crow if I'm wrong, but I really don't think so. Just simply from a storytelling standpoint, how anticlimactic would it be if Luffy can just apply an ability that he already knows, and then suddenly the God's Knights are not really invincible? I wouldn't rage quit if it happened, but that would be booty. When you introduce a new, seemingly unbeatable technique, right, the hero needs to go through some kind of journey to figure it out. That is just how this story works. But actually, let's tackle this from an even deeper level. And obviously, there's going to be a lot of speculation here because we're not entirely sure the details, but this is just what I think. The power of conquerors' haki in the first place is related to one's soul. Or soul and consciousness, whatever. But from a combat perspective, if you go back at the usage of conquerors' haki, I think that it's using your soul against other people's souls. So when Luffy first unleashed conquerors' haki in the pre-time skip, it's basically like, look, my soul is king, and those who have really weak souls, they're passed out. My will has crushed yours. I think that the same basic premise applies to advanced conquerors' haki as we saw it in Wano. Kaido had this reputation of being unkillable. His skin was impenetrable. So you apply a more tangible form of conquerors' haki to attack him from within, literally attack his soul. Like, just so we're on the same page, your soul is synonymous with your life force. Attacking it directly would sap somebody's strength and potentially cause a lot of harm. But this technique was absolutely crucial in Wano because of Kaido's devil fruit. Luffy was not made out of the same stuff as Kaido, so attacking him physically, you'd be at a disadvantage. And I see this as being different than regular armament haki, because armament haki, even if it's perhaps similar, attacks somebody physically. So with advanced conquerors, you bypass that dimension entirely. I honestly think that you should think of the soul as energy. If you know how to use it, it can pass right through physical substances until it meets the energy of another person's soul. But yeah, boring technicalities aside, essentially what I'm saying is that so far, conquerors haki has been used to attack other people's souls in both its base and advanced forms. But the thing about the God's Knights and the Gorosei is I do not believe that they actually have a soul in their body. A condition of their deal with Imu is that Imu takes it. So in my opinion, Ryu would be useless against the God's Knights. But that doesn't mean that Conqueror's haki is useless. So I feel like I've laid out my thoughts in this already and it's pretty non-controversial, so I'll just say it right. I think that the powers of the God's Knights and the Gorosei relate to shadows. A shadow can be a soul substitute. We saw this in Thriller Bark with Moria's zombies. So what I think that Luffy needs to learn is the ability to perceive and attack somebody's shadow, as opposed to their soul. While I guess you might think, well, shouldn't Conqueror's haki just do that innately? You know, maybe not. To me, Oda has telegraphed pretty loudly that Luffy has a talent in perceiving other people's souls, sensing them. Generally speaking, he's a great judge of character and can gauge people's intentions. Honestly, Oda has been hammering this in recently. This is why Luffy trusts Loki and how Luffy seemed to know that it was Chopper, specifically Chopper, that fell from the sky. But quite frankly, Oda has been building up to this for a very, very long time. This was the subtext of the Luffy and Katakuri fight and why Luffy essentially turned that fight into training, because he innately knew that Katakuri did not want to kill him. So he had no intention of delivering a fatal blow. He wanted Luffy to give up. But even earlier than all of this, all the way back to the pre-time skip with characters like Nami and Robin, this is how Luffy is able to discern when somebody is lying to him. When their voices say one thing, but their soul is screaming otherwise. So anyway, this is a long way of saying that I think that Luffy has a unique talent in sensing other people's souls, but I think that everything has its own kind of wavelength, if you want to think about it as energy. Like, I really don't want to have a physics class with you guys, but essentially you have to match that wavelength if you want to damage something spiritually. Like, as an example, the way that a microwave works is that a microwave specifically targets molecules of water. Just water and nothing else. That is how it heats up your food. It emits electromagnetic waves at a very specific frequency that energizes water. And just to be thorough here so that I'm sure that you're following along with what I'm saying, electromagnetic waves are the same as radio waves, X-rays, and visible light itself. All of this is the same thing, but at different wave frequencies. A lot of it doesn't interact with us, we can't perceive it, it just passes right through us. But in the real world, we've already developed directed energy weapons, kind of like a microwave, but shot like a laser. This electromagnetic wave or light at a very specific frequency that could literally pop people. And I mean that in the most horrific way possible. But it doesn't just have to be people or water, it could literally be anything if you have the right frequency. This includes things like metals. Literally exploding metals from the inside is an actual thing. But anyway, I feel like I've lost a lot of people's attention, but I promise you this is relevant because I think that it's very relevant to what Zoro has already demonstrated in the story. In Alabasta versus Mr. One, he called it the breath of all things. Straight up, what we've been talking about here and what Zoro was talking about there, I think, are the same thing. In fact, I think that Zoro is a bit farther along in mastering this technique than Luffy is. This is the secret to how Zoro was able to cut steel. To accomplish this, it didn't require brute force. It required Zoro to have the ability to sense steel's unique energy or wavelength. So at the very least, this is an incredibly good explanation for why the conversation quickly panned to Zoro. So Gabon tells Luffy, be mindful of the way you use Conqueror's haki. Those guys are by no means immortal. And Luffy says, thanks, you can count on me. I'll save Colin and his friends no matter what. Then Loki chimes in, Gabon, that just made it click for me. I wasn't able to put into words before my own power. I'm the only one left who's faced these knights before. I know I can beat them. So in my opinion, Oda is telling us outright, 1, Loki has Conqueror's haki, which is no big shock, but 2, Loki potentially has a form of advanced Conqueror's haki that Luffy has not mastered yet, because he has already fought the God's Knights and was able to injure them. Loki seemingly figured this out on his own, perhaps similar to Zoro. But yeah, guys, this makes a ton of sense to me, because right now, we are under the impression that Loki is blind. So you could say, well, perhaps he has observation haki. I think that that is very likely to be true. But kind of like our conversation about conquerors haki so far, the way that I understand observation haki is, again, using your soul to sense other people's souls. The way that I understand the power of future sight, as an example, is that you can read somebody's intentions before they actually act upon them. Their soul is telegraphing what they will do, so you can react before they do it. But yeah, hell, you could even look at Usopp in Dressrosa. As he is targeting Sugar with his slingshot, she becomes like this energy form. I think that Usopp has the ability to use observation, and he was seeing her soul. So obviously, if Loki is blind, being able to perceive other people's souls would be very useful to orient himself in the world, specifically interaction with other people. But if you're blind, literally everything else would matter as well. Not just a human soul, but like, what if there's a rock on the ground, right? You would have to be able to perceive that the rock is there, or else you're likely to trip. So in my opinion, Loki has compensated for his blindness by unlocking the ability to perceive the breath of all things. This is why he does not need eyesight. He can see and perceive everything perfectly fine, probably even better than a normal person. Like, Loki is freaking Daredevil, but I guess a more like spiritual version of that. Honestly, a lot of people have already been pointing out to me the similarities between Zoro and Loki. Luffy met Zoro tied to a cross, Luffy meets Loki tied to a tree. Both have seemingly accepted punishments that they don't really deserve. There's even some similarity in the dialogue. Zoro asks Luffy, "Could you please come here and untie me? I've been tied up for 9 days and I'm exhausted." He continues, "I'll repay you. I could hunt down a fugitive and give you the rewards. I'm not lying, I'll keep my word." And then in the same page, Kobe is like, "Don't free Zoro. He's going to trick you. If you free him, he'll kill us and escape." And Luffy's response to that is, "Well, that's not going to happen. Like, I'm strong too." Which is pretty much 100% how Luffy's conversation with Loki went. Loki asked to be free, is like, "Look, if you free me, I'll hunt down an enemy of your choosing." And then people warned Luffy, if you free Loki, it's going to be a bad time. And Luffy's like, "Well, I'm strong, so if he steps out of line, then I'll just beat him up." It is all the same. So this conversation about both possessing the ability to perceive the breath of all things would hammer home these parallels even further. You could even look at Zoro being blind in one eye. And I don't really want to bring up this whole conversation, but there's been speculations for a long time that Zoro is intentionally choosing to do that because it somehow helps with his training. Also potentially similar to Shanks, right? Losing his arm didn't make him any weaker. Potentially it made him stronger. So Loki, being blind, has been training from his youth in order to better perceive the entire spiritual world, and thereby has made him substantially stronger than a regular person or even giant. But anyway, Loki's like, "Look, I can help in this fight," and we'll talk more about Loki and Hiruden later. But Scopper goes on to say, "There's another in your group who uses conquerors haki." Sanji leans in to Scopper, "Is it me? I knew it with how things were going. Mosshead and Jinbei were about to usurp me." But Scopper Gaban was looking at Zoro. "You there, swordsman, your body seems to be growing accustomed to it." Zoro, meanwhile, "I have conquerors haki?" Which, by the way, is another parallel to Loki, because Loki also didn't know how to put into words his abilities, his power. Luffy's face, "What? You didn't even know? It's been oozing off of you." Scopper continues, "How absurd. Haki is a power that must be understood and tamed. Your captain is one of the 4 emperors. You should be meticulous if you intend to have his back." But yeah, there is so much conversation surrounding this, and I honestly think that people who are surprised or upset by this simply have not been paying attention. Straight up, guys, to me, this is not even a little bit of slander towards Sanji. In fact, it is the complete opposite. Frankly, I would be more concerned if Oda did not acknowledge the clear gap that has formed between Zoro and Sanji, honestly, since the pre-time skip. The last time that I truly felt like Zoro and Sanji were rivals or even close to being equals was in Eni's lobby. To me, what we got in this chapter was as good as a promise. Look, you're right, Zoro has separated himself from Sanji, and conquerors haki is a big reason why. But we know that Sanji is not going to allow Zoro to surpass him like that. This is essentially a promise that at some point soon, Sanji will develop conquerors haki. And all of this, I think, is even more abundantly clear and self-explanatory when you realize we're talking to Scopper, who was a member of Roger's crew, and Roger had 2 people on his crew who both possessed conquerors haki and were rivals with each other, not entirely sure who is stronger, Rayleigh or Scopper, and there are a lot of parallels between Scopper and Sanji. So for me, this is everything that I wanted. I always felt kind of icky to even bring up for a second the fact that Zoro is clearly stronger than Sanji. Conquerors haki being a big reason why, you know? But I just feel like there's a lot of people that just won't accept that that is clearly the case. And at the same time, it does not mean that end of story, Sanji won't be as strong as Zoro. He's just got some gains he needs to make. This actually makes me even more excited for the future of the story for Sanji because now we set him upon a path. Like bro, seriously, look at Sanji in this chapter and tell me that he is not totally deluded, because he is. Scopper's like, well, somebody on this crew has conquerors haki, and Sanji leans in, it's me, right? No, you freaking idiot. Get your head out of your ass, buddy. Honestly, the whole thing is hilarious and probably very poignant. Like, I feel like Oda really spent some time to make sure that this dialogue was perfect, because it all has meaning. Zoro is not concerned about being stronger than Sanji, because he knows that he is stronger than Sanji. This is not a rivalry to him. It's Sanji who is actually very sensitive about somebody in the crew having an ability he does not, because he knows that Zoro is stronger than him on some like very deep level, absolutely reeking insecurity. So Zoro doesn't really understand that he possesses and uses conquerors haki, and the reason for this is innocent. For whatever reason, he just didn't notice. Kind of like his sense of direction. In some respects, Zoro is not very perceptive. But Sanji has always been the foil to Zoro. Zoro's weaknesses tend to be Sanji's strengths, and vice versa. So Sanji tends to be detail-oriented. He is much more perceptive about what is happening in the physical world. So when he hasn't noticed that Zoro has been using conquerors haki, that is intentional. He's like chosen to erase that knowledge from his brain. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure of how specifically I want to take this, but I have a strong suspicion that there is going to be 3 different kinds of advanced conquerors haki. You have the weaponization of the soul, aka Ryu, which is Luffy's wheelhouse. Then you'll have 2 other versions which will be specialized to Zoro and Sanji. Again, the exact way that you want to phrase this probably is very important, and I can only like stumble through this, but Zoro can do something to the effect of peek into the spiritual world, existing in the plane between life and death. So I kind of straight up think that Zoro is actually going to be the first one among the crew to damage the God's Knights, because he'll be able to intuitively sense what they are, to be able to cut them. And likewise, I think that Oda will give a similar moment to Sanji eventually, and it'll revolve around his heart and the power of love. I guess a way that you could potentially think about this, which may or may not be true, but a way you could think about this is if Zoro is closer to hell, I think that Sanji is closer to heaven. And there may be a conquerors haki technique that is associated with each, that they may be a little bit further along with than Luffy, just by nature. So again, I can't really tell you like specifically what this will be. We're so balls deep in the realm of speculation that there's no escape. But when you're talking about conquerors haki, you're talking about will, right? That's what that is, that your will to accomplish something. And Zoro, as an example, was able to cut steel because he desires to cut things as a swordsman. So his nature is very attack-oriented. To me, Sanji is the opposite. Sanji's will is to protect people. This is why when he wears the Germa raid suit, he looks like a Power Ranger, because Sanji is a hero. Obviously, he's incredibly biased to saving the damsel in distress, but I think that this is who Sanji is. So perhaps there is a defensive application for conquerors haki that we do not know of yet. I mean, let's just be honest, right? Oda has kind of already made offensive armament haki irrelevant when it comes to top tier fights. The next step would really be to make the defensive aspect of armament haki irrelevant. But if this isn't the way that Oda chooses to take it, I think that a more substantiated idea from the story is simply focusing on the fact that Sanji can produce flames. I've said this many times before, I'll include a link in the description, but I think that there is a relationship between Sanji's flames and the eternal flame. which Vegapunk describes as the ultimate power source. He seems to possess the ability to stoke the fire in his soul, while Zoro is a stoic Buddhist whose ultimate goal most likely is to let go of his worldly desires. Sanji seems to embrace his worldly desires. Like guys, there is a reason why Scopper Gabon is so fulfilled by his life in Elbaf, having a child with a beautiful giant, right? This is his paradise. If Sanji lives till old age, his future would be very reminiscent of this. Embracing the things in the world that you love. Enjoying life to its fullest. Like guys, do you see what I'm saying? Zoro is a Buddhist, and Buddhists teach that you should detach from your worldly desires. Basically, the idea is that these are the root cause of all suffering. And I'm sure that a high-level Buddhist could probably explain this better than me, but that does not mean that you shouldn't live your life full of things that you love. So to me, Sanji kind of represents the other side of the coin. It is very often that emotion is the source of Sanji's strength. Like when he spontaneously combusts when Nami is in danger. He can harness the energy of desire. I think about this in a Might Guy kind of way. Might Guy from Naruto. Basically the ability to make yourself several times stronger over a very short time span. Honestly, a theory that I've been quietly rooting for a very long time is the idea that when Sanji fully masters his ability, he can transform literally into a demon, horns and all, becoming a being with immense desire, but not through the lens of death and destruction, but of love, which could also end up being very similar to the God's Knights and the transformation of Dory and Brogy. However, Sanji still has his soul, which would be important for the love component of this. Anyway, I've always liked this theory, one, because it's cool, and visually, in my mind, I imagine this being epic. Two, desires, I use that word very specifically because desires are also related to devil fruit. And while the word desire has kind of a negative connotation in a lot of cultures, desires and dreams are synonyms. So not all desires are evil, obviously. And Sanji's techniques have names relating to the devil. But understanding that all of this is probably wrong in some small or large way, all I'm really trying to say is that Oda, I think, is likely to be setting up something special with Sanji that'll interrelate with Conquerors haki in the future. So despair not, Sanji fans. But anyway, as chapters continue to pass, man, I am so freaking hyped about Loki. He is so freaking cool and interesting. I almost want to go so far as to say that Loki might end up becoming the best character that is not a Straw Hat of the post-time skip. I don't know if that's true, but I feel like saying it, so that's something. We've already talked about parallels between Zoro and Loki, but I also think that you should open your mind to the possibility that there are parallels between Sanji and Loki as well. To me, it is not a coincidence that in this chapter, Sanji's kind of freaking out, right? Like, you're talking about me? No, it's not me. Hey, what about me? He's getting emotional. And at the same time this is happening, Loki is getting emotional as well. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it in before Loki becomes somebody who loves more than anybody. Remember when Reiju told us that nobody is kinder than Sanji? And if you go back to Mosa's conversation with Loki, Mosa said, "You're a lot kinder than you seem to be." Loki does not like to acknowledge it, and there's a theme of lies with Loki, but he's clearly somebody that loves deeply. I kind of think that he has a similar hero complex as Sanji, rationalized in his own distorted or deluded way. But it could be with Loki, what Oda is trying to convey is the things that you love will ultimately hurt you the most. So Loki is some kind of bad future Sanji. And I mean, if you really think about it, there is some parallels or some similarities between Sanji's backstory and the backstory that we expect for Loki. Also some clear foils as well. But Sanji, like Loki, is a prince. Sanji, like Loki, is kind of the black sheep of his family. They're both different. And related to all of this, although in different ways, Sanji's family hated him, and I think Elbaf as a whole hated Loki. But the clear foil here is that Sanji was always hated for his weakness, while Loki has always been the strongest. Loki also has a persona of anger and violence, while Sanji is the opposite. But I'm just of the opinion that from a very young age, Loki was aware that Elbaf despised him because of the prophecies which predate his birth, as well as the death of the queen when he was born. Sanji ultimately chose to run away, while Loki decided to stay, harboring the resentment of not feeling loved. Also important to Sanji's backstory was his relationship with his siblings, and something similar seems to be the case here with Loki and Hyrden. So I guess what I'm saying is that Loki is very similar to the Vinsmoke children, except compassion has not been taken from him, it's simply turned into anger. And I feel like having this conversation in this way opens the door to dissect Loki and parallels with Zoro in the same way. Zoro likely wants to abandon his worldly desires, and in Loki this manifests as a plot to destroy the world. So anyway, I feel like I'm cooking up something here, but regardless, I hope I convey how interesting Loki seems to me. In my opinion, Loki is a fascinating contradiction. Somebody with objectives similar to Zoro but warped, but the heart of Sanji. So in my opinion, perceiving Loki in this way makes what is happening very understandable. Deep down, Loki wants to be the hero of Elbaf. So he learns that there's a threat, and despite everything that he says and does, his first instinct is, hey, I'll deal with it. Maybe there's even a Zoro component of this, of it being a challenge. Loki wants to be the strongest. But unlike Zoro, he wants love in his life. He wants to be love, and he wants to love. So whether he admits this or not, it is not about him. He'd be fighting for Elbaf, not for himself, but for Elbaf. Also, I didn't mention this earlier, but you can just throw this in here, right? We're told that Loki fell in love with Lola with the arranged marriage with the Big Mom Pirates, right? So that is a component for sure of Loki's deepest desires. So this takes us back to the way that Loki reacted to Hyrden telling him, no, you can't join us, we can't trust you. Loki is an emotional being. So Hyrden tells Loki, who's to say you won't side with the government? You could easily stab Elbaf in the back again, just like you did on that day. How can you expect me to trust you? And just the look on Loki's face as Hyrden says this is almost an acknowledgement of the validity of what's being said. Like, bro, you're making a good argument. I have tricked the entirety of Elbaf into believing that I am the bad guy. So we're seeing lies come back to bite somebody in real time. The web of lies is crumbling upon itself. There's something that Loki wants to do, but he's basically got to admit that he lied in order to do it. But remember the conversation that we had about Luffy being very perceptive about people's intentions? Being a great judge of character? I guess here Luffy was reading the room and decided to act, because he knows that Loki can be trusted. So in an uncharacteristically high IQ moment, Luffy turns to Loki and is like, look, join my crew. If he does that, then you can't complain if I free him, right, Hyrden? Alluding to the fact that Hyrden pledged his loyalty to the Straw Hat crew. Meaning if Loki was one of them, then he would be honor-bound to do as he said. Zoro immediately, get real, Luffy, there's no way we'd fit him on the ship. Yeah, think of the food supplies, he eats even more than you do. And Luffy says, Elbaf doesn't seem to want him, but he seems okay to me. Besides, if he tries anything, I can always beat him up. So yeah, obviously here we have another thing from this chapter that has inspired a lot of discussion. And just frankly, I think that we should entertain this conversation. Like this whole thing, why is it being said, right? Why are we talking about Loki joining the crew? Why did Luffy bring it up? What is the point of all of this aside from being a joke? Because skipping ahead just a little bit, like we had this whole moment and then it just kind of we forgot about it. Oda very slyly snuck that in there. And then despite the fact that Luffy found this loophole at warp speed, nothing came from it. This could end up being foreshadowing that Loki does in fact join the Stride Pirates. That's just, look man, that is reality. It could be. But if you asked me if I actually think that Loki will join the crew, my fairly confident answer is no, I don't think so. Beyond the logistics which Zoro and Sanji point out to us, I just have a very strong feeling that Loki is going to die. And I also completely believe Loki when he says that he has absolutely no desire to become anyone's underling. But yeah, just to expound upon this for a moment, right, we can go back to our conversation of parallels between Zoro and Loki, and importantly, point out what is different about them. Zoro's dreams and Luffy's dreams are not mutually exclusive. They can both accomplish what they want together, and the same is true of all of the other Straw Hats. This is essentially why Zoro is willing to become Luffy's subordinate, because he does not believe that he needs to be the captain of the greatest pirate crew in the world to be the world's strongest swordsman. But what I think that Loki wants is I think Loki wants to be Nika. So he can't be Nika if Luffy is Nika. And honestly, I think that there is lore which still exists within Elbaf which tells them that Nika is also the captain of the greatest pirate crew in the world. So being the captain is specifically relevant. I think that we should also point out that in the past, Loki was inspired his whole journey because of Rock's D. Zebek, who we're told through Sengoku wanted to become the king of the world. So if Loki eventually states his dream to become the king of the world, right, that should not come as a shock to anybody. So being the king of the world would most likely preclude you from being a subordinate to anybody. So just sitting here and musing out loud, what I feel like Oda is really doing is he's exploring every avenue of the universe that he's created. I honestly feel as though Oda often asks himself hypothetical questions of, given anything, like what is possible? So then you just apply this to potential members of the crew. What are the different ways that a member could join? And also, what are the different ways that a potential member would not? And Oda has been doing a lot of that recently. I think that there's a lot of similarity between Vivi in the pre-time skip in Alabasta and Yamato and Wano, except Yamato is probably more similar to Pell. Essentially, they both independently came to the conclusion that their country needed them. That's why they could not leave and begin their adventure with the Strats. You could probably also throw in an element of Jinbei in this as well, because like Jinbei, there was things that Yamato needed to accomplish first before she could join. This conversation also bleeds nicely into Momonosuke, who has similar parallels here with both Vivi and Jinbei. Like Vivi, he is the crown prince of his nation, and his nation needs him. But like Jinbei, he needs to accomplish something first, which is to become independently strong enough. But this isn't the only way to tackle the question of how members could fail to join. In my opinion, Pedro was a legitimate prospect, and I know that Luffy never asked him to join the crew, but had Pedro survived the events in Whole Cake Island, I think that him joining was a definitive possibility. But obviously he couldn't join because he died. So for me, Luffy asking Loki to join the crew explores how dreams can contradict one from becoming a Strat. I'm unsure if I fully understand everything going on here at present, but speculating, I think that Loki fits in almost every way what is required to join the Strats, except that he cannot have the role that would be required. Essentially, he is another version of Luffy. He needs his own crew. But yeah, even if all of this conversation here wasn't persuasive or understandable in any way, I truly do think that Loki dies. I think that Hiruden's dreams don't work while Loki lives. That's just what I think. I just cannot imagine Hiruden becoming the true king of the giants while Loki is around. So for me, what this interaction really did is it fully established Loki as a rival to Luffy. In my mind, the relationship between Luffy and Loki is meant to parallel the past relationship of Roger and Rocks. And in my opinion, it foreshadows a lot about the nature of Rocks. So I may not outright express this in future chapter reviews, so just hear this now and then apply this in the future, but my perception of Rocks now is going to be very similar to my perception of Loki. I think that when we finally get to know this dude, we're gonna think to ourselves, wow, that he's like Loki, which would make a lot of sense because Loki idolized him. But anyway, the chapter continues and the giants are ready to go, and Hiruden tells Luffy, sorry Straw Hat, Loki is a condemned criminal in Elbaf, I can't just hand him over to you. And then Luffy's over there sitting angry, really? Which feels like something we could discuss more, but I'll let it go for now. And then Scopper Gaban chimes in, Hiruden, release Loki. What was that, Yasun? 14 years ago, Loki murdered 113 members of the castle guard. He left Elder Jarl at the brink of death, killed his own father in cold blood. He's the worst criminal our country has ever known. So Scopper says, I know, but on that day I felt a strange emanation of haki coming from the castle. Shanks and I went there to investigate. Looking back, it's possible we didn't have the whole story. Meanwhile, everybody is freaking out. You went to the castle? What the? Then Luffy's like, wait, did you just say Shanks? So Hiruden's like, hold on, Stanson, I'm sorry, go ahead without me. There's things that we need to learn. Luffy is the same. Zoro Sanji, I'll catch up in a bit. But as a side note, I'm not going to bring up this theory again, but it is baffling to me of how interested Luffy is in Shanks in this arc. Boy is ready to meet Shanks. His name comes up and it does not matter what else is going on, which is frankly very, very weird. Zoro seems to be in the same mindset because he says this dumb Shanks thing again, which Luffy totally misinterprets. So Sanji translates, no Luffy, Shanks is not dumb, you are being dumb, with your hyper-focusing on Shanks. But after all of this, Loki turns to Gabon. And Gabon says, Hyrden, who else can get him talking? You may have had different mothers, but you're still brothers. And I just feel like the way that Oda crafted this was all very intentional. What we said earlier is that Loki wants to save Elbaf. He deep down wants to be the hero of his country. But the cost of doing this required him to admit that his entire persona was a lie. Given the opportunity to reveal the truth, Loki chose not to. So in a way, Gabon kind of backed him into a corner by figuring out or deducing that, look, we know enough now to know that what we thought was the case was not true. Basically, I think the purpose of all this was for Gabon to inform Loki that they would figure out the truth without him. Your lies are going to be exposed regardless. So if there's something that you want to do, this downside is not what you think that it is. So if you tell us what actually happened, you get what you actually want. Gabon made it a very easy decision. So Hyrden says, you have 3 minutes to explain, Loki. Tell me what happened in the castle 14 years ago. If you truly consider yourself a warrior of Elbaf, swear on our gods that what you say is the truth. And all of this leads into a flashback 14 years ago. But before we get into it, I just want to make sure that this is said. Guys, even though Hyrden asked Loki to swear by their gods that what he says is the truth, I never actually saw him swear to this. So what we might get, I don't think necessarily has to be the complete truth. And while Hyrden seems to respect Elbaf's gods, we don't know that that is necessarily the case for Loki. Again, we paralleled Zoro and Loki a lot in this review. One of the things that Zoro outright says is, I do not pray to gods. Full disclosure, I think that Loki sees himself as the god of Elbaf, so this promise may be worthless to him, even if he were to make it. Loki is a liar, and amidst things that will likely be the truth are potentially things that are false. Just feel the need to clarify that. This may also explain why this flashback in the later half of the chapter is very confusing. But anyway, 14 years ago, Elbaf Castle. Apparently Harold has called many people to the castle, and even Prince Loki has returned. I guess it's implied that before now, Loki had left Elbaf, went on his own short adventure. But just to overanalyze and read between the lines a little bit here, I kind of wonder if Loki left Elbaf because he did not want to kill King Harold. We know that Elbaf has become something that Loki disagrees with. So he could have left for a number of reasons, but I think potentially baked into all of this is Loki wants to save Elbaf, he wants to be the hero, and he thinks that the king is leading them to doom and siding with the bad guys. And there's this prophecy from before he was born that he's supposed to kill the king, and I think that his love for his family and his father is potentially part of the motivation of just getting the hell out of there. But anyway, in the castle, Loki immediately meets Elder Jarl, and I found this interaction really interesting. In part because of my theory that Elder Jarl actually thinks that Loki is Nika. Obviously, if this is the case, you can't really tell, and this is all part of my headcanon for Elder Jarl, that he believes this but actually hasn't told anybody this. And similar to Loki himself, is living a lie. He's secretly Mosa. But I just immediately noticed how attentive Elder Jarl was when Loki started to talk about his vision for Elbaf's future. Loki says, I wonder what Harold wants. It's hard to care about the whims of a government dog. He's sold out to the people who killed rocks. If that's the direction Elbaf's heading, then I'll oppose it. And Elder Jarl doesn't necessarily disagree with him, just says, you're being loud, I'm too old for this stuff, politics is a young man's game. But from prior conversation that we got in Big Mom's flashback in Whole Cake Island, we already know that Jarl probably agrees at least somewhat with Loki's interpretation. Then Loki says, we're in this mess because you keep spouting off that kind of nonsense. Now we've got a whole generation of peace-addled brats who can't even hold a weapon. And amidst all of this, we have the notorious ... of a person who has thoughts that they do not wish to share. Whenever you see the ... you know that Oda is withholding something about a character. In this case, Elder Jarl there's something really important he could say, but is choosing not to. But if you look at Elder Jarl's expression as he has the ... thinking text bubble, then you can kind of get a sense for the nature of the kind of comment he would have. In my mind, his expression looks concerned. So in my mind, this can go one of three ways, and some of this bleeds into the others. 1, he could be concerned about Elbaf's future. 2, he could be concerned that Loki is going to do something bad. Or 3, he could be concerned that Loki has such a low opinion of him, that he is doing something wrong. But either way, he seems very interested in what Loki has to say. The only other character that acts this way is Mosa. Right now, that is simply facts. Elder Jarl eventually responds to Loki and says, "That's just a sign of the times. It's nice to know that my great-great-grandchildren won't see combat. They want peace." Which in my opinion adds more insight into Elder Jarl as a character. It matters to him what other people want. And to that Loki says, "Coward, it's your duty to whip them into shape." I feel like I'm saying this entirely too often, but man, all of this interaction is it's just fascinating. It's so interesting. This is a real philosophical discussion we could have. Elder Jarl and Loki are at polar extremes, and I'm not sure that being hardline in either direction is actually always the case or always true. Elder Jarl has something that he believes and that he wants, but at the same time, he respects other people's ability, their freedom, to choose a path for themselves. Loki, meanwhile, has a perspective more like a king. I guess this is just the kind of thing that I like thinking about. You can think about this from the perspective of a parent. As a parent, which is essentially a ruling figure, is it your job to tell your children what they should want? I'm pretty sure the vast majority of people will knee-jerk to this question and automatically say, no, it is not your job, that a person wants what they want. Go be free. So then let's make this a thought experiment. What if your child wants to huff paint? Or something else that is obviously incredibly stupid and harmful? I feel like that might lead to some stuttering. And it's from this perspective that I kind of disagree with Elder Jarl's philosophy. Obviously, there's a difference between trying to give somebody your wisdom or counsel, lead them in the right direction, and then literally forcing them to do as you desire. But as it seems to me, Elder Jarl does not have a whole lot of desire to even express out loud what it is that he actually thinks. To me, it's almost hilariously ironic. He says, "I'm too old to play politics," while acting like a politician, not actually saying what it is that he believes. But I'm of the opinion that sometimes this kind of fight is your duty, sort of like Loki suggests. Outside of ideal circumstances, being a parent, I think, often or sometimes requires you to be the bad guy. So in my opinion, this is why Loki calls Jarl a coward, and simultaneously implies what Jarl is afraid of. Like, I'm just trying to find the right way to word this. I guess a hypothetical that works here is, if you really think about it, I think that most people see the flaws in the world, right? And there's so much that's wrong, and you would like to be able to fix it. But from the moment that you decide to fix the world's problems, you most likely end up becoming the greatest evil on the planet, if you have the ability to unilaterally execute your vision. I'm trying to find an example that isn't overly political. So maybe we can talk about overpopulation, okay? Now, whether or not you believe that overpopulation in the world currently is a problem, I think conceptually, right, we could reach a point where that could lead to the deaths of everybody from starvation alone. At some point, there could absolutely be too many people. We could destroy ourselves and the world. So imagine this for a second. In order to save the world, you need to reduce humanity's population, likely by force because we love to procreate. All of this simply serves to demonstrate that there is absolutely a possibility in the future that in order to save the world, you have to become the world's greatest evil. So assuming that you believe this to be an existential threat, should you or would you do it anyway? Loki is saying here that he would, and I think that Elder Jarl is saying that he would not. But this is just one of those questions that I don't think actually has a real answer, not universally. Really, what I think that it comes down to is your belief or your hope for the future, which in my opinion is something that the One Piece story preaches. There is a way to both save the world and not become the world's greatest evil. Or at the very least, you should believe in that possibility, because anything is possible. Whether it's the case or not, there could always be a better answer. that you simply haven't figured out yet. All of this is very interesting to think about with respect to Nika, because the lore around Nika is that Nika brings great change. And if you look at the real world, the people of the real world that bring about great change are very egocentric and self-assured. They have identified what the problems are, and because of their belief in themselves, have the will to enact it, whatever the potential cost may be. Like, if you just took me specifically, I am full of a lot of very strong opinions about right and wrong and where the world has gone wrong and what could potentially be done about it. Not saying that my opinion is necessarily correct, but just simply having an opinion implies that you believe something. And most of us don't believe that we're wrong. If you thought in that way, it's probably some sort of mental illness. But at the same time, I have no desire to actually bring about the change that I believe in because of the horror that would likely involve. Honestly, I would rather be loved in a dying world than save the world and be hated. So despite my criticism of Elder Jarl, ultimately, I think a lot like him. So I guess you could frame it like saving the world is simply not that important to me. Not that I would actually have the ability to do any of this, just hypothetically, okay? Most of us are just not that guy, and I'm cool with it. But obviously, this conversation becomes a lot more relevant when you are a sort of Loki in the real world, right? Where you have the power, for sure, to enact great change if you choose to apply it. So in my opinion, this is what makes Elder Jarl's perspective the sort of common man perspective. The world can change for the better, and this can be accomplished in a way which doesn't harm a lot of people. I cannot tell you what that answer is, but someone someday will figure it out. And until then, I'm just here living my life to the best of my ability. But yeah, like I said earlier, I think that this is what the story of One Piece preaches, and this is Luffy's role in the world. He is that guy who will eventually find the better answer that nobody else has figured out or has the ability to execute. He's gonna save the world and be a hero for it. So while we have an actual Luffy, then a pretender Nika, like Loki, is in fact the bad guy, despite his good intentions. But in the back of my mind, I really do wonder, is there really a better answer? Should we sit around and do nothing until we discover some kind of greater truth? For me, it's a matter of hope and faith. Elder Jarl knows that his children do not want to fight, and so is choosing to believe that that future is possible. Therefore, it is not his duty to stand in the way of their dreams. I also kind of think that this philosophy only works in One Piece because One Piece also preaches that, look, making mistakes is okay, if you die, it's cool. But let's not get stuck in this rabbit hole forever. But from here, with Elder Jarl, Loki bursts through the door, and on the other side, he has discovered that King Harold has been impaled by all of his guards. Man, guys, this is not how I thought things would play out. And I've got some thoughts brewing about what exactly is going on here. But in my opinion, what is absolutely clear based on Harold's silhouette is he is very obviously transformed into a demon. You can see horns. I think that you can see something which resembles wings, like Imu has transformed Harold into a demon. That is the case. But what doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me is his own guards attacking him like this. If you want something to compare this to, look at when Imu transformed Dory and Brogy. Was it the first reaction? Were the giants quick to turn on Dory and Brogy like this? No. I feel like you need to go through a few stages of grief before you impale somebody that you love. Also, I just kind of expected a more intricate plan from Imu and I guess Harold. Harold is now transformed into a demon. He's invited everyone to the castle. You would think that the objective would be to transform everybody else into a demon, just like we are seeing in the current story. Jumping through all of these hoops just to end up impaled by everyone simultaneously seems like a whiff. So I just think that there's something about this that we don't fully understand yet. Like Oda has a creative element here that he is not yet revealing. So this is probably too creative on my part to actually be the case, but just a thought I want to throw out to you is, one of the things that made Harold so influential in Elbaf, in my opinion, he could win fights without ever fighting. In fact, if you go back just a few pages, Elder Jarl expresses this. It's nice to know that my great-great-grandchildren won't see combat. They want peace. They do not want to fight. Herald has inspired this dream within Elbaf. They believe that it is possible because of him. So maybe this is 9,000 IQ, right? And I'm outthinking the story, but if your herald's trying to convince the country of Elbaf to become demons, perhaps it would be wise to show them what the power of being a demon. We already know that demons cannot be killed by normal means. So just thinking out loud, what if Herald asked the people that he invited to the castle to shank him to demonstrate, look, this is how our country will never, ever need to fight. Because as a demon, you can never be killed. Honestly, it would make a lot of sense to me. Herald has this great reputation in the country, but obviously Herald is special. I think that he's built kind of like Kaido, you know, so he could take whatever beating was thrown his way and still get up because he's just on another level. But while he may not need to fight in order to win battles, the rest of the country is not the same. But they could be the same if they were demons. Anyway, I just like this interpretation because it makes Emu and Herald look more thoughtful, like they had some kind of real plan. One of my favorite aspects of stories involving the devil is conniving, the devil is manipulative, the devil tricks you by playing on your desires. So to me, Herald transforming into a demon and then everyone in the room realizing that he's a demon and attempting to attack him is just clumsy. It's a lot more interesting if Emu has considered what Elbaf's dream is, what Elbaf's desires are, and tempting the country with it. I really hope that makes sense. Like, hey, if you can't die, there's even less reason to ever need to fight, which is what you want. Here, let me demonstrate. But if it works out like this or not, what is happening here opens up an entirely new possibility for how this whole event played out. We've now been under the impression that Emu transformed Herald into a demon for several weeks now, right? But I always thought of it from the perspective that it would work similar to what's happening in Elbaf now, that you would have this AoE effect that would transform other giants into demons, and they would be acting a lot like Dory and Brogy. Essentially, look, we're demons now, and we're evil, and this is just, you know, it's obvious to everyone. It never really occurred to me that it's possible that Herald could transform into a demon, and then literally convince all of the other giants to take the same deal. That you can be a demon and still have the same dreams that you had before, and be the same person. Either way, what we're definitely lacking in the flashback right now is an explanation for how Emu intended to flip the entire country, because right now the only demon is him. So maybe you thought that I spent a little bit too much time trying to analyze Elder Jarl and Loki's conversation, and we went down a wild dovetail that doesn't seem all that relevant, but that conversation could end up being vital to understanding what happens next. Loki has repeatedly told us that he would choose to save Elbaf even if it makes him the bad guy, even if Elbaf hates him for it. So let's dig up another thing that we said earlier in this review. Loki is blind, and I think that he has the ability to perceive the breath of all things. This is why he does not need eyesight. So he walks into a room and discovers his father, King Herald, potentially missing something that made Herald Herald, his soul. And maybe he's attempting to coerce others to do the same thing. Could this be how it all began? The giant guards, even while not transformed, sided with King Herald, and Loki decided to fight them all because he could sense something that the others could not. And this is where it gets really interesting because of something else that Loki said in this very same chapter. He said, "Gabon, that just made it click for me. I wasn't able to put into words before my own power. I'm the only one left who's faced these knights before, and I know I can beat them." Basically, guys, Loki has a unique talent to be able to fight the gods' knights, and therefore his own father as a demon. He can sense the breath of all things, and he possesses conquerors haki, and he was able to apply it in the past. So as he walks into the throne room, and if he decides to fight King Herald, he could win that fight. And maybe a circumstance like that could force Herald's hand to fight Loki back in return. This is just a cool idea to me because it's important whether or not Harold fights, but obviously we made a whole lot of assumptions here, and I guess some people will listen to what I'm saying here and it's like, bro, did you even read the chapter? Because all of the guards are actually stabbing King Harold right now, so why are you saying that they will be on his side, so welcome to my brain. But I suppose while we're here, to go back to some comparisons potentially between Sanji's backstory or story and Loki, a lot of this makes me think about Sanji versus Judge in Whole Cake Island. Sanji abandoned Germa Kingdom for a number of years and then finally reunited with his father. With Loki and King Harold, I don't know if the time span is quite the same, but you have something similar here. Loki is reuniting with his father after a long time. In Whole Cake Island, it didn't take very long for Sanji to fight his father, and he could have won that fight. Similar to what we were speculating here with Loki and King Harold, Loki could defeat his father, even as a demon. And clearly, he would have reason to fight him. However, when Judge Vinsmoke used obedient meat shields to defend himself, Sanji just could not do it. It seems to me that it would be about here that Loki would do something different than Sanji. He seems resolved to do what it takes. But to me, this just seems like something that is worthy of keeping in mind. Oda loves these sorts of parallels and inversions, and I'm sensing a lot of similarity here in what is going on in Sanji's story. But then from here, the flashback flips to Scopper, Gabon, and Shanks. We kind of glossed over this before, but at the time that King Harold was murdered, Shanks was already in Elbaf, which is a hell of a coincidence. But for now, I'm gonna skip over this section of the chapter because, man, there's some things to talk about here as well. But it seems to me that we only get this aspect of the flashback because Scopper, Gabon is literally here in present as Loki is telling the story. In a way, I think that Loki and Scopper are telling the story together. So we're getting the event from both of their perspectives, which is why the end of this chapter is so confusing. We go from an absurd amount of detail. I mean, like, we're having entire conversations between Loki and Elder Jarl, and entire conversations between Scopper, Gabon, and Shanks, and then suddenly it seems like everything is being summarized in no detail at all. As we can see from the outside, giant blasts of haki emanating from the castle, the narrator suddenly chimes in. That day, the massacre at the castle took place. Elbaf's most beloved king, Harold the Benevolent, lost his life. We can see Scopper and Shanks sense what's happening. They ask, "What's this?" And then we flash back into the castle. There's this random guard says, "Let us out. Who closed the gate? Help!" This guard dies, but we don't actually see who killed them. Elder Jarl gets shanked in the head. We don't know who stabbed him. Then suddenly a lock breaks. There's a shadowy figure. We don't know who this is. Apparently somebody is looking to steal the forbidden devil fruit that is passed down within Elbaf. Then the narrator chimes back in. But just how did this man come to be so highly regarded by his people? And we're suddenly thrust into a backstory for King Harold. So I guess what I'm wondering right now is whether or not Loki actually told the rest of the story in any real detail. Is Loki still looking to lie about what actually happened? What exactly is the point of all of this ambiguity? Are we not actually going to get the end of this flashback until sometime later? I suppose that we will find out for sure sometime soon. But I did make an argument in a recent chapter review that, just think about why Loki did not tell the country what happened. It's essentially confirmed that King Harold transformed into a demon, but Loki decided not to tell anybody this. It just so happens to be the case that in this flashback, again, that detail is being obscured. For all of Loki's big talk, it just seems to me like he does not want to ruin his father's reputation in Elbaf. He's willing to say, yes, I killed my father, and I had a reason for doing this, I didn't want to do it. But he won't say why. So for me, this seems like justification enough for Loki to continue to lie, say, perhaps enough to be freed, but we still don't know exactly what happened. If you take the flashback at face value, what you could conclude is that Harold's guards killed Harold, and then Loki killed Harold's guards. This would be an obvious lie to us, the reader, but maybe not so obviously a lie to Luffy and the others listening to Loki's story. But probably over here thinking a bit too much about it. I just found it to be a very intriguing way to present all of this. Oda always finds himself a way to continue to string us along. But yeah, the final page of this chapter is about King Harold in his youth. He's clearly a pirate, And the narrator says, a long, long time ago, 109 years before present day, if you asked anyone what the scariest thing on the sea is, the answer would always be the same: the giant warrior pirates. That was how things were in that era. In that age, even ships from the land of giants evoked immense fear due to Elbaf's reputation. Then we see them as they are raiding an island, and my god, Harold is an absolute bastard. The narrator continues, Harold began his reign at 45 years of age, just 15 in human terms. Despite this, King Harold, remarkably enough, was pure scum. So look man, in this review I feel like we've talked entirely too much about things that I just don't know. Love me some theories and to explore all the possibilities, but sometimes enough is enough. So I'm just gonna leave this one be. I have absolutely no idea how the bastard King Harold came to be known as Harold the Benevolent, but I'm on the edge of my freaking seat. This is a story that I want to read. Actually, I do think that I want to say one thing. Something that I hope is explained within Harold's flashback is how eventually he fell in love with Hyruden's mother and had Hyruden, because that was supposed to be a taboo thing. I just feel as though love is a theme within Elbaf and could potentially play an important part in how things happened. I also think that love is one of the strongest motivating forces of change. So if Harold was a bastard at 15 but was not a bastard later for some reason, love could be the reason. And it's additionally interesting because we're about halfway through Elbaf, and another thing that hasn't been explored or explained yet is Loki's arranged marriage with the Big Mom Pirates and Lola. His love, supposedly, for Lola. You know, like, this could all end up being related. Also potentially hammer in further comparisons between the Vinsmoke royalty and the royalty of Elbaf. Bunch of horn dogs that would do anything for love. Well yeah, I'm real excited to find out for sure. So the only real thing left to discuss from this chapter is Shanks. I honestly do not even know where to begin. I kind of feel like saying nothing again. Is that allowed? Would you guys let me do that? Would you hate me if I just said nothing? Like for real, 2 pages from this chapter has inserted an entirely new story within Shanks's backstory that I never even for a moment thought was there. Good God, man. I'm gonna try to summarize this as succinctly as possible. During this part of the flashback, for the most part, Shanks is simply hanging out with Skopper Gaban in Elbaf, which is presented like a paradise. So first things first, Skopper Gaban says this: it's been quite a while since we've shared a bath. How long has it been? 3, maybe 4 years? And Shanks says, get real, it's been 10 years since the captain died. I have no idea if Oda is just stringing us along, but we had a theory a long time ago that I don't think I've brought up recently, that time moves differently in Elbaf, which could be related to Louis Arnott's warning, which has still not been explained. He literally says, do not overstay your welcome in Elbaf, which itself implies that the longer that you stay here, the greater some kind of danger is. I also interrelated this with the Little Garden arc, which was actually brought up in this chapter, but in Little Guard there was a weird thing regarding time. It was a prehistoric island. It seemed to be developing slower than the world around it. And this even applied to the log pose, which took 1 entire year to reset. Well now guys, we have Skopper Gaban, who presumably has been staying in Elbaf pretty much since Gold D. Roger died, and for him, it feels as though 3 or 4 years has passed, when in fact Shanks tells him it has been 10. Oda is either trolling us or this is the answer. So look guys, if we just take this as truth and run with it, if the Straw Hats are only here for a few days, then assuming that the ratio of time is the same, that essentially 3 years in Elbaf is about 10 years outside of Elbaf, then it's not going to matter. The Straw Hats end up staying in Elbaf for 5 days, it's like 15 days. 15 days isn't that long, not a big deal. So if this is the case, the only way that I really care is if the Straw Hats end up staying here for a lot longer than we think. If a month passes, or potentially several months pass, then we could be talking about a post-time skip time skip. That is essentially what this would be, but not for the Straw Hats, a time skip for the rest of the world. So that when the Straw Hats inevitably leave Elbaf, the world that they re-enter has changed significantly. This could also potentially explain Imu's impatience when it comes to the God's Knight's activities in Elbaf. I mean, if time is moving slower here, right, then the threats in Mary Joie needs to be looked at differently. But Shanks and Scopper's conversation continues, and this time I'm reading from the Viz translation, which is probably more accurate. He says, "Yeah, my life's changed entirely. My plan was to join up with Buggy and lead a laid-back pirating life. But even here in Elbaf, there's so much more to learn." And then Scopper says, "You're a child of fate, Shanks. Don't bother thinking over the tricky little details. You remember Little Garden, the island where we met Dory and Brogy? Of course." And we get no more of this exchange. I would be lying to you if I told you that I understood exactly what is happening here. But it is clearly important, and with reveals in the future, we're gonna go back, we're gonna read this with a whole new understanding. That is a guarantee. But I'll give you what I can. Shanks is essentially saying that his plan after the Roger pirates found Laughtail, they discovered the truth, Roger became the Pirate King, right? His plan was to join up with Buggy and live a pirating life as simple and laid back as you could imagine. Basically, I took this to mean that Shanks was fulfilled by the Roger pirates' adventure, and that grand ambition was satisfied. Or he had planned to be satisfied. But then he goes on to say, but even here in Elbaf, there's so much more to learn. To me, this implies that despite Shanks' plan, he still feels as though the journey is unfinished. Either Roger didn't actually find it all, or Shanks wants to find it all himself. So my rough opinion, which is subject to change, is Shanks is essentially communicating to Gabon that he is considering taking up Roger's mantle and going even further. The questions are eating at him. Now, I'm sure that at this point, all of this kind of makes internal sense. You know, this is what Shanks said, this is how I interpret it. Oh, JB, you know, like, okay, this works. Why it doesn't work is in Scopper's response to this. Scopper says, "You're a child of fate, Shanks. Don't bother thinking over the tricky little details." What does this mean? Firstly, if there are things that Shanks is curious about that he's wanting to learn about the world, why would Scopper discourage that for any reason? But doubly, why would he discourage Shanks when he describes Shanks as a child of fate? What in the world? So look guys, I'm just gonna say something and I hope that you can follow me, okay? Shanks is a child of fate, that is literally what Gabon said, but that does not mean that Shanks is a child of fate for a good reason. We know Luffy is Nika, not Shanks. So other potential children of fate might not necessarily have the same role. So basically guys, the only way that this makes sense to me right now, and this is a stretch, I understand, there's many things that we could potentially say, but the only way that this makes sense to me right now is that when the Roger pirates found the true history, they found the prophecies of Nika, it mentioned somebody that resembles Shanks. But this character that resembles Shanks, or potentially aspects of Shanks' story, was not Nika. So bear with me for just a moment. Hypothetically, the prophecies of Nika mentioned a man with red hair and scars across his face as an antagonist to Nika. This is actually a theory that I have already made. I'll include a link in the description. It's a BLACKBEARD video. But the idea is that BLACKBEARD is also striving to become Nika, is also somehow aware of the prophecies of Nika, potentially because of his relation in some way to Rocksteady Zebek. But long story short is BLACKBEARD attacked Shanks because he also, the same as Rayleigh, has determined Shanks to be a child of fate. The person that Nika is destined to defeat. Or at least a person that Nika is destined to defeat, a significant, noteworthy milestone. But you'll notice that this theory only really works if Shanks is a child of fate in some sort of negative way. Because in my opinion, Scopper is telling Shanks to not continue the adventure, do not pick up Roger's mantle. This could also potentially interrelate with why Shanks cried when he last saw Roger. Roger told him something that made him cry. Most people assume that Roger told him, hey look, I'm gonna die, you know, and Shanks was sad about that, but Roger could have told Shanks his role in the future based on what they had learned. Shanks always wanted to follow in Roger's footsteps, but then cold hard truth came from the man himself. You're not that guy. Do you guys see how this interrelates with my random aside earlier when I dissected Loki and Jarl's conversation? You know, like I had a plan. I promise you I had a plan. Sometimes it's not apparent, you know, but thoughts are in my brain. If you know you're not that guy, then don't try to change the world. The only thing that you can succeed in doing is becoming the world's greatest evil. This would also explain why Shanks' ambition, potentially, or his plan, became to join up with Buggy and lead a laid-back pirating life. You know, it's just like remove all ambition, because I think that I'm potentially destined for bad things. So he's informing Scopper that his plans have changed, and Scopper's immediate response is, hey, you know, like, don't overthink it. So now let's interrelate this with what we learn after, and I think these two thoughts together become very interesting. Scopper tells Shanks, you know much about King Harold? They worship him like a god here in Elbaf, and Shanks says, yes, I met him in Merijois. We got along all right, but there's something we couldn't talk about in the Holy Land. So if he's back home, I'd like to meet him and discuss it before it's too late. So guys, we now know that during the 10-year time skip, Shanks somehow found himself in the Holy Land, Merijois. And if you have a keen eye or you read the spoilers, you can see that at this time, right, Shanks still has his left arm, and he's in a bath. You can see that there is a tattoo on his left arm, some kind of mark. A lot of people are wondering if Shanks possesses the mark of the Abyss, the same as the God's Knights. So quite frankly, guys, I find this theory to be likely. It adds so many layers to Shanks' story, potentially, but in layman's terms, this is what I think. During the 10-year time skip, Shanks found his real family, discovered that they were celestial dragons and God's Knights. How or why, the circumstances, was Shanks actively looking for his real family? I cannot tell you, but this simply happening seems very plausible to me. The other thing that I think is true, and I think is essentially confirmed through Buggy, is not a lot of people, maybe nobody, is truly aware that Shanks and Buggy were members of the Roger Pirates. I don't think that they were notorious enough to earn bounty posters. I could be wrong about that. Maybe this has been confirmed somewhere. But we know that Buggy, as an adult, nobody seems to know that he was a former member of the Roger Pirates. When he told everyone, they were all shocked, and suddenly this was big news. And he was able to remain low-key in the East Blue for essentially his entire adulthood, despite his legendary past. So if this is Buggy's story, I imagine this is Shanks' story as well. It opens up the door that Shanks could potentially reunite with his family, and they wouldn't be fully aware of his past or the threat that he potentially poses to them. And just straight up, guys, Shanks strikes me as very analytical, as kind of a schemer, you know? And given an opportunity like this, maybe his curiosity got the better of him, and he took some time to infiltrate the world's government. Without a doubt, there are many things that Shanks could potentially learn as a high-ranking member of the world government that would be much harder to obtain as a pirate. So maybe he played the game. And eventually what he discovered was Emu, hence the mark on his arm. Like seriously, they say curiosity killed the cat, and I'm envisioning in my head that Shanks almost trapped himself into a corner where he was forced to make a deal with Emu and pretended to swear allegiance. So why isn't Shanks a subordinate of Emu now? Which I absolutely do not think is the case. Well, one, he lost his arm. Could be relevant. I have no idea. Could be relevant. But two, I think that Shanks' conquerors haki, his strength, could potentially allow him to resist Emu's influence. Seems like a definitive possibility to me. But like I said earlier, I want to interrelate this to the conversation that we got beforehand. You would think that if Shanks has discovered that he's a celestial dragon, that his family are God's Knights, and potentially he's already sworn some kind of allegiance to Emu, that he's obviously not Nika, right? He's not that guy, so it's not his place to continue Roger's adventure and take it to its end. But instead, he seems to be saying the opposite. My current headcanon for why this would be the case is, if Shanks met his family, then he met his twin brother, Shamrock. If there's something about Shanks which has led people like Scopper to believe he is a child of fate, then these very same things could end up being the case for Shamrock. If Shanks believed himself to be a child of fate in some kind of negative way, by meeting Shamrock, his opinion might change. Essentially, they have confused Shanks and Shamrock. he has a twin brother. All of this is highly speculative, and I want you to know that, but this would be a very intriguing way to have Shanks have a change of heart, that he had decided to live a low-key life without ambition, then met his twin brother, and potentially thought, look, I can follow in Roger's footsteps now. I can be that guy that saves the world. They were wrong about me. The only real question that this hypothetical leaves us with, however, is, okay, well then what changed after Shanks acquired the Gomu Gomu no Mi? Why didn't he eat it? And why eventually did he choose to bet the future on Luffy? The only thing that I feel like I can speculate is it might have something to do with Imu and the mark on his shoulder. Was he ever possessed by Imu, and could such a thing have spooked him, made him doubt? Anyway guys, that's all I can really say for now. I'm still chewing this over myself. But in this very same chapter, Oda highlighted the forbidden fruit located within Elbaf, and I think with Shanks' presence here, it is implied that this legendary fruit was the Gomu Gomu no Mi. I'm actually wondering if the Gomu Gomu no Mi is the true reason why Shanks is here on this day. He didn't actually come to catch up with Scopper. He came to very subtly tell Scopper that I'm beginning Roger's adventure again, and I'm gonna need this fruit because I know that it is important. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I hate thinking about Shanks in this way. It's manipulative, but if I were to be honest, do I think that Shanks is capable? Yes, I do. If he has resolved himself to pursue the One Piece and accomplish what Roger could not, then stealing the fruit is a very small price to pay, even if it's some kind of betrayal. So if you ask me who the silhouetted character is that broke the lock on the box that is supposed to contain the legendary devil fruit of Elbaf, I think it was Shanks, honestly. The timeline matches up almost perfectly from chapter 1 of One Piece when Shanks finally has the Gomu Gomu no Mi in order for Luffy to accidentally eat it. We know that King Harold died approximately 14 years from the present day, but if you go to the pre-time skip, right, 2 years has passed, so from the very start of the story, 12 years had passed since Harold's death. Luffy began his adventure at 17, meaning Harold died when he was approximately 5. It's just about right. Also, right now, the only thing that we know about how Shanks acquired the Gomu Gomu no Mi is he stole it from some kind of world government vessel. Well, now the potential exists that the government ship that Shanks stole the devil fruit from was his own ship, because at this time, Shanks was posing as a member of the government. But anyway, guys, I really don't have it in me to speculate any further. You could potentially make a case that Shanks might be involved in the death of King Harold and the events of Imu's plan, and like he's not just there as a coincidence, he is there because he was ordered to be there. You can go down that rabbit hole. I hope not. It's hard for me to believe some aspects of it, but you could probably figure out how it might work. So yeah, if you take nothing else from this, I want you to know that my opinion about what is happening here is not very strong. I'm just about as clueless as everybody else, and incredibly excited to see how exactly Oda takes this. My brain is a bit fried and scrambled. How would any of this potentially work with Shanks' own pirate crew, which he somehow acquired on a pirate adventure? Like, look, I don't have all the answers. So if anyone out there does, please share them in the comment section so that we can all be happily spoiled together. You know, as always, curious as to what you guys think, whether you noticed something from the chapter that I might have missed, just share your thoughts. If you're interested, check out my book, The Booms, link is in the description. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day. Also, this is my longest video ever. Let's go.